Channel Sports Central will be going over our next NFL game preview of this 2020 season, and that's going to be over the Vikings and the Colts. And this is a very important game in determining how both teams will do this season. Of course, both teams started out 0-1 on the season. Vikings lost to the Packers last week. Meanwhile, the Colts dropped one to the Jaguars of all teams. The Colts did lose to the Jaguars last week, so that's going to be, this is a very important game for both these teams to try to turn around their teams. Because if you go 0-2, that's not a very good start at all. So once again, very important game between both of these teams. And so we'll be going over a full preview and prediction on it. I'm gonna give you guys a full preview as well as my prediction for the game and what you can expect from both these teams. That being said, let's look at our team trends for both these teams. Of course, once again, Minnesota lost to Green Bay 34-43 last week. Meanwhile, the Colts dropped one to the Jaguars 20-27. So both teams lost in somewhat close games. The Vikings, I don't think, ever led against the Packers, but it was still a higher scoring and a pretty close game. Meanwhile, for the Colts, they kept it close to the Jaguars the entire game, but they should have beaten Jacksonville. The Jaguars are pretty much a team that it looked like they were just going to tank going into the 2020 season and try to pick up Trevor Lawrence in the upcoming draft, which that'd be a very reasonable decision considering, the Jaguars, they've got Gardner Minshew, but he's not that good of a quarterback, so they definitely need someone better if they're wanting to be a playoff team. But nonetheless, they're winning streaks for both these teams. Of course, once again, they're both at one loss each. Vikings are 0-1 heading into this game. Same thing with the Colts. So that's also another reason why, once again, why this is such an important game for both of these teams. Of course, this game is going to be on Sunday, September 20th. It's going to be one of your noon games, noon Central, 1 p.m. Eastern. It's going to be in Indianapolis. Spread currently says Colts by 3, so it's expecting it to be very close. ESPN FPI is as close as it can get. Colts are predicted to win 51%. Meanwhile, in Vegas, they're actually predicting a much more favorable win for the Colts. 26-17 is what they're predicting for the score there. So yeah, all three of our sources here are picking the Colts in this game. And of course, with the Vikings and Kirk Cousins, honestly, going into this game, I'm more confident in the Vikings than I am with the Colts. The Vikings, of course, once again, dropped one last week to the Packers, but the Packers are a good team. The Jaguars, meanwhile, are not. And so for the Colts, that was, once again, they had a much worse loss last week than the Vikings did. And with Minnesota and Kirk Cousins at quarterback, if he can play well, and Dalvin Cook, I am much more confident in the Vikings than I am with the Colts. The Colts have gotten a very experienced quarterback now with Philip Rivers, but still, Philip Rivers, I would say, is nothing more than an average quarterback. Now let's look at your stat comparison. Of course, last week, Kirk Cousins, 19 for 25, 259 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. So he had a decent week against the Packers. Dalvin Cook had a decent game too, 12 attempts for 50 yards and 2 touchdowns. Meanwhile, their second running back, Alexander Madison, had a good game too, 6 attempts for 50 yards. As far as the receiving corps goes, of course, they don't have Stephon Diggs anymore, so they had to rely a lot on Adam Thielen, who had 6 receptions for 110 yards and 2 touchdowns, and also B.C. Johnson, who had 3 receptions for 56 yards. So all around, the offense was pretty good, I'd say, for the Vikings last week. It was just the defense that was absolutely horrible for Minnesota last week. That's really what nailed them in the end. The offense played well enough to be able to win. Obviously, Kirk Cousins, he can't be throwing interceptions like that, but, Minnesota in general, it's just their defense that played terrible last week, and that was the main reason why they lost. As for the Colts, of course, you got Philip Rivers at quarterback, 36 for 46 last week, 363 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions, and so he didn't have all that great of a game. He did have a pretty good completion rate, but he had 2 interceptions, and if you're going to win a game, you cannot throw 2 interceptions like that. That's just... that's not a way that you're going to win a game. And so for Philip Rivers, he's got to get that figured out before next week. Obviously, with him being in a brand new system, that could be part of just kind of the growing pains of that. But yeah, Philip Rivers, once he gets adjusted to the system of Indianapolis, I think that Colts team could easily be much better. And of course, they just didn't have the preseason. That's something that you'll see out of some new quarterbacks and new programs. Tom Brady would be another big example of this. They're going to be rusty at the first and in the first parts of the season because he didn't have a preseason to be able to get ready for the actual season. So for Philip Rivers, that could have been part of just being in his first game with a brand new team. Considering how long he was with the Chargers, like over a decade, this was just kind of a bit of a different experience for him. And we saw that out of Tom Brady as well. Tom Brady did not have a very good week with the Buccaneers last week, so that's just something that I kind of noticed as the week went on. But as far as the running back core looks, it looked pretty good for the Colts last week. Nyheim Hines had 7 attempts for 28 yards and a touchdown. Meanwhile, Jonathan Taylor, the rookie, 6 receptions for 67 yards. Paris Campbell, and he had 6 receptions. Jonathan Taylor hardly ever ran last week. Paris Campbell was their top receiver, 6 receptions, 71 yards. Meanwhile, T.Y. Hilton had 4 receptions for 53 yards. So all around for the Colts last week, I mean, they were decent on offense. I mean, definitely you gotta lower your turnover rate. But as far as the defense looks, both teams definitely need to fix their defenses if we're going to see both teams doing well in the future. As far as their key points go, Philip Rivers had a tough first week once again. He definitely needs to fix up those interceptions if this Colts team is going to do well. Vikings had a slow game against Green Bay, of course. I mean, that's pretty obvious as well. Vikings really were behind basically the entire game, and whenever the Packers would score, the Vikings would, but they just could not get over that hump, and their defense just could not stop them. But yeah, turnovers will easily decide this game, I think. That's going to be something that you got to watch out for. I mean, both teams had a couple of turnovers last week, so I mean that's going to be very important in deciding who's going to win here. Is by the turnover ratio. So if whoever has the better turnover ratio here is very likely going to win. Watch out for B.C. Johnson, though. Once again, I mean, of course, he's with the Vikings, and he's kind of taking over the spot of Stephon Diggs. And he did a pretty good job last week, so watch out for him going into next week. He could have a pretty big game coming up. But otherwise, I mean, teams are equally skilled easily. This is a very, very tough game to predict, mainly because of that. I mean, you got the Colts on one hand, they're at home, so that's already going to give you an advantage. But also, I mean, they've got a decent team in general. Philip Rivers, a quarterback, he's been a good quarterback in the past. And honestly, I mean, the offense is looking pretty good. However, for the Vikings, once again, I'm much, much more confident in the Minnesota Vikings right now than I am with the Colts. But all around, both teams are pretty equally skilled at this point, even though the Colts are probably the more inexperienced team, I would say. But now let's look at my prediction. Of course, I think the Vikings will kind of take control of this one. We're going to see a 14-10 halftime score. Vikings will be leading, and they're going to finish off with a 20-24 win. Vikings won the beating off the Colts, so I'm actually going against the spread here. I think the Vikings go into Indianapolis and pull a big upset. I mean, the Colts are favored in the spread, the FPI, and in Vegas. So, yeah, this is kind of a weird pick, kind of a risky one as well. But I think the Vikings in general are the better team. I mean, with Kirk Cousins at quarterback, he can definitely be a good quarterback if he's not throwing interceptions or anything, which, I mean, if you look at his completion rates, I mean, really, Kirk Cousins is a great quarterback if you look at it that way. But yeah, for the Vikings, this offense needs to do very well if they're going to win, and their defense needs to really improve. I mean, if the Vikings defense plays this week like they did last week against Green Bay, I'm not as confident that the Vikings will win. I mean, the defensive side definitely needs to be fixed up for the Vikings if they're going to be a contender to the NFC North this season. But I do have the Vikings winning once again. 28-24 will be your final score. But I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments below as to whether or who do you think is going to win this game. I'd say this is probably one of the better ones of week number 2. Obviously, both teams are 0-1, so no team is undefeated here, but it should be a good matchup either way. A couple of great teams going head-to-head, so yeah, it should be a fun one. But yeah, once again, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this preview, be sure to slap a like on it and subscribe as well. It really helps out the channel, and I really appreciate that. As always, thanks again for watching. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. I will see you all later.